Kia ora koutou, Markie here, the grizzled walrus of retroactive jealousy, also known sometimes as Scarface, not because I have scars, but because I have lots of scarves. So, on to serious business, retroactive jealousy. Can you get a diagnosis? Can you get a formal diagnosis of retroactive jealousy? And if so, can I give you a formal diagnosis of retroactive jealousy? Can the practitioners at Retract give you such a diagnosis? Well, short answer is no. That makes for a very boring video, so stay on and I'll explain the detail and where it stands in terms of diagnosis. So technically you could get a diagnosis of retroactive jealousy from a doctor or from a clinical psychologist. They're two professions that are able to diagnose psychiatric or mental health conditions. So a psychiatrist, any doctor, but ideally a specialist. So a psychiatrist is essentially a medical doctor that has specialised in mental health. And so they're medical doctors, so they can give a diagnosis. Technically speaking, I believe even a GP could give you a diagnosis, and a clinical psychologist who's not a medical doctor but will have a PhD, so they'll have the title doctor, can give diagnoses. However, there is no the condition retroactive jealousy is not formally recognised by the orthodoxy of the medical or psychological professions. Okay, so it doesn't mean that they can't give you a diagnosis. I don't know quite where they'd stand if they did, but generally speaking, people that give diagnoses in any kind of mental health condition rely on diagnostic manuals, and there are two diagnostic manuals that are commonly used. One is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used by the American Psychiatric Association, and that's used by a lot of countries, not just America. And then there is the ICD, which is part of the World Health Organization, and they're actually very similar. In fact, a lot of the conditions in there are identical, but there are some differences. Sometimes they use different terminology. So, for example, in the ICD, they talk about. So that kitchen roll behind me is bugging me. This is where this channel falls down because I have ADHD, and you don't get a slick presentation. You get a homely presentation on this channel. If you don't like homely presentations, you might need to find a different channel, but this one is kind of homely. It's like having a friendly chat. So the ICD-10, for example, talk about emotionally unstable personality disorder, whereas the DSM refers to it as borderline personality disorder. That's a controversial diagnosis. We've done videos on that, why it's controversial and what it might mean and what maybe it should be called, but that's another thing. So they're the kind of the greatest pillars of orthodoxy, and retroactive jealousy is not in either of those. I hope one day it will. In fact, I'm working very hard to ensure that one day, or before too long, it will be. Because a lot of what we do with these videos is spreading awareness and making people more aware of retroactive jealousy, gathering data. We're not in a position to do formal research at the moment, but we're constantly gathering data and learning more and more about retroactive jealousy, so that at some point it can go through, be recognised by academia and recognised by the psychiatric and medical and psychological establishments. So hopefully one day it will be. But we believe that, and this is kind of the general consensus, it's not set in stone, but the general belief is that retroactive jealousy is a form of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. So you're much more likely to get a diagnosis of OCD. If you've got retroactive jealousy, it will probably be quite easy for you to go and see one of those professionals that can give a diagnosis, and they would probably quite happily give you a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder. But at the moment, it's very unlikely they would give you a diagnosis of retroactive jealousy. They would have to be a very kind of progressive, out there practitioner in order to do that. So please don't have hopes. I do see in on online social media platforms people talking about being quite shocked and disappointed that they go to see a professional who doesn't seem to know about retroactive jealousy. That's the norm. Expect that. It's grown all the time, but there's a handful of clinicians who actually recognise and work with retroactive jealousy. There's a lot of other people that work with retroactive jealousy who aren't qualified clinicians. They offer peer support based on their own recovery and stuff like that. But there's a very small number of clinicians that recognise retroactive jealousy. But it's growing and growing and growing. And you can help with that process by doing things like sharing this video, liking the video, subscribing, joining us on our Patreon channel to support our work, because that's a big part of what we do. Yes, we are a business. We do provide therapy, but probably the bulk of what we do is free stuff. It's just giving free information to people and free help to people. And you can help with that, and that will hopefully make one day we'll make retroactive jealousy something that is in those diagnostic manuals and is widely established and accepted and talked about, which will make life a whole lot easier for a whole bunch of couples. So that's a really good thing. So you're much more likely to get a diagnosis of OCD if you go to a clinician that can give a diagnosis. They're very unlikely to give you a diagnosis of retroactive jealousy at the moment, but hopefully that will change. Now, can I give you a diagnosis of retroactive jealousy? That's another simple answer, no. So I'm a psychotherapist by profession. As a psychotherapist, I can't give diagnoses and I can't prescribe medication. So I'm not medically trained, I'm not a doctor. So there are some psychotherapists that can do that, but that would be because they're a psychotherapist and they're also a clinical psychologist, or they're also a psychiatrist, or they're also a medical doctor. So that's how that can sometimes happen, which people get confused about. I've got a whole series of videos on psychotherapy and what psychotherapy is and differentiating it from these other professions, which you might find interesting. So check out that one. So I can't give a diagnosis. So why, Markie, on your website is there a questionnaire which asks lots of questions, and then people that fill this in online, they get a personalised reply by email saying whether they meet the traits associated with retroactive jealousy. Well, that's what we call a screening questionnaire. So for example, if you think that you might have ADHD, you can go online and fill in a tick box questionnaire, and it will say, if you score, above 80, there's a high likelihood that you've got ADHD. If you score below, it's a very low likelihood. Those are screening questionnaires. They're not diagnostic questionnaires, so they can help a clinician make a diagnosis, but a clinician would never make a diagnosis just on the basis of that, because you have to do a lot more work and assessment in order to make a diagnosis. So they'd have to clap eyes on you and meet you and have a conversation with you. And for some conditions, clinicians making diagnoses will want to what they call collateral information. They'll want to talk to people that know you, so they want to talk to your partner or your mother or your best friend, and get sort of third party information about you before making that diagnosis. And run, in some cases there's other tests. Sometimes there's a whole battery of questionnaires and psychometric tests that go into that as well. And it's the opinion of the clinician is based on the combination of all those things. So the questionnaire that we offer to people is based on what we know about retroactive jealousy, the main symptoms, and it's also based on some of the subtypes of RJ. So RJ can be broken into 3 subtypes in terms of the kind of things that, how can we put this? I suppose 5 subtypes, but you can, but there's 2 different modes of subtyping, I guess. So one subtype is there's what we call the male subtype and the female subtype, which aren't unique to those genders. So you can be female and have the male subtype, and male and have the female subtype. I won't go into that because we've got videos on that. There's also the combined subtype. And then there is what we call comparison RJ and non-comparison RJ. So some people with RJ there, it's more about kind of disgust is the primary emotion around, you know, what their partners, who their partner's been with and what they've done previous to their relationship. But other people, it's much more comparison orientated. So they'll think about their partner's exes and compare themselves to them, usually unfavorably. They'll think, oh, you know, they're much prettier, or, you know, oh, they're a great big, you know, guy with muscles, you know, how can I compete with that? Or they were more intelligent, or they had a higher social status. So these are the kind of things that we look at and we pick out when people fill in the questionnaire, and that's the kind of feedback that we can give to people. So we don't say, when people complete the feedback, we don't say, yes, you've definitely got retroactive jealousy. And it would be very difficult for anyone to do it, even, like I say, a progressive clinician that can make a diagnosis, because there is no formal clinical criteria for retroactive jealousy. But there are things that we know about. There are a number of commonalities with retroactive jealousy, and they are included in the questionnaire. So, for example, one of the things there is a very big component of retroactive jealousy, and identifying whether it's likely to be the case, is some kind of reassurance or information seeking. So that can be asking questions, or it can be snooping, looking in diaries and going on social media and prying into things you shouldn't be prying into, to try and get further information which you think will make you feel better. That's a big one. So these are the kind of things that we include in the questionnaire, and what we can say is, you know, we can give you a strong likelihood of, based on what we know and the fact that it's not a formal diagnosis, this is how much your symptoms tie in with what we know about. But it's not a diagnosis. You know, we won't ever say to anyone, yes, you've definitely got retroactive jealousy, because we can't. But really, it's kind of making your own decision, really, based on that data. So some of the other things in there are not just about jealousy. Often it's about a feeling of disgust or anxiety. That's very common with retroactive jealousy. Seeking the reassurance and the additional information, feeling a sense of temporary relief, and then after a short while the cycle begins again, and you start to question more and worry more, and the anxiety and the unpleasant feelings get higher and escalate. And there's a bunch of other things that we look for, and we look for the two different types. So one type of the male type of retroactive jealousy is more more focused around a history of one-night stands or threesomes or kind of, you know, sexual gymnastics, whereas the male subtype, this comes from the work of Zachary Stockhill, the female subtype is usually more anxiety around meaningful relationships, you know, longer term relationships, marriages, romance, shared lifestyle. So we tell you kind of where you stand in terms of your symptoms and what we know about retroactive jealousy, and we tell you, you know, where you might fit in terms of the subtypes. And if your symptoms kind of appear to be kind of similar to retroactive jealousy, but there are some kind of key differences, like you don't have a partner seeking information and reassurance. There can be a whole bunch of reasons for that. It could be that it's, you know, atypical. It's not quite the norm of retroactive jealousy, but it's something very similar to it. But maybe a hang up over some of the same kind of issues, but without the obsessive compulsive disorder dynamics to it. So we'll comment on that as well. And of course it can be because you've done some recovery work and you've got a lot better, or it could be as well because the retroactive jealousy is quite new. It's emergent, and therefore all the full symptoms haven't come flooding in yet, unfortunately. So excuse me. So we're very cautious in terms of what we say to people in the feedback. And the other thing is really that no matter what, you know, the symptomology is, whether it is, you know, whether it closely matches what we know about retroactive jealousy or not, our team can help with it, because we're all kind of seasoned qualified, experienced therapists and counsellors have worked with a wide range of issues, including, and especially relational issues. If you're distressed, we can help, basically. We're not just one-trick ponies, and in fact, one of the things that might behoove us to do is to make ourselves available more as a service for anyone that's troubled with any kind of jealousy, and that just might open things up a bit more for people, make us a bit more available. So I hope that answers your question. So we can tell you how closely you fit with what we know about retroactive jealousy, but we can't give you a diagnosis. It'd probably be very difficult for anyone in the world at the moment to actually give you a formal diagnosis of retroactive jealousy. But a very progressive, very out there clinician might stick their neck out and say that you've got retroactive jealousy. I'm not aware of it happening yet, but please just help us in any way you can in terms of promoting, and spreading this information, so that hopefully one day, before too long, it will be much more widely recognised and people can get help much more quickly, rather than kind of searching around thinking, what's the matter with me? I must be mad. There can't be anybody else like this that's feeling the same way as me. But of course, we know that there's God knows how many people, thousands and thousands of people suffering with retroactive jealousy. Some who are luckily have become aware that it's a thing, but most not knowing that it's a thing, and they're suffering on their own in silence. So thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below, and I will see you very soon in the next video, which may or may not be about retroactive jealousy, because we feature other things on this channel just to keep the channel alive, keep the channel active, keep people watching, get the views up and that kind of thing, so that it spreads the message about the retroactive jealousy. So the retroactive jealousy is at the core of everything we do, really, even though we do videos about all sorts. So if you're confused about why we're a retroactive jealousy channel, we kind of we do videos about strange lights in the sky, and we film kind of creatures in rock pools, and we talk about TV programs and analyze song lyrics. That's why. So thank you again for all your support. We can't do it without you, and Rangimarie.